I still remember the exact taste of that morning. Watered down oatmeal that had gone cold while I stared at the cracks in the ceiling. Powdered milk that never quite dissolved, leaving chalky streaks on my tongue like the residue of all those years I had spent waiting for something to change. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, that same electrical hum I had heard every single morning for 4 years, a sound that had become so familiar I sometimes heard it in my dreams. That was the morning of my 18th birthday, March 17th, the day the state of Ohio officially decided I was no longer their problem. I sat alone at the corner table in the cafeteria of St. Michael's group home, pushing the oatmeal around with a plastic spoon that had been washed so many times the edges had gone soft. Through the window, the sky hung low and gray, the color of old dishwater. Patches of dirty snow clung to the edges of the parking lot, slowly melting into puddles that reflected nothing but more gray. Somewhere behind me, the younger kids were making noise, laughing about something, fighting about something else. The sounds washed over me like water over stone. I had learned a long time ago how to be present without really being there, how to exist in a room full of people while keeping the most important parts of myself locked away where no one could touch them. No one except Silas. My brother sat across from me, 15 years old with dark circles under his eyes that made him look like he had not slept in weeks. Maybe he had not. The last few months had been hard on both of us. Knowing this day was coming, knowing that once I turned 18, everything would change. Silas had not touched his breakfast either. His spoon sat abandoned beside his bowl, and his hands were clasped together on the table like he was praying. Maybe he was. We both knew what today meant. The system had rules about these things. Clear rules. Cold rules. Once you turned 18, you aged out. That was the phrase they used. Aged out. Like we were milk going bad. Like we had an expiration date stamped somewhere on our skin that nobody had bothered to tell us about. After today, I would have to leave. Find my own way in the world. Figure out how to survive without the safety net of government assistance that had caught me when I fell 4 years ago. But I had made a decision 6 months earlier that complicated everything. A decision that the social workers said was foolish, that the case managers said was unrealistic, that everyone with any authority over my life said would never work. I had filed for legal guardianship of my brother, an 18-year-old with no job, no savings, no family, no permanent address, trying to take legal responsibility for a minor child. The paperwork sat in a folder somewhere in the county courthouse, probably gathering dust between stacks of other impossible requests from other desperate people. I had signed it anyway, because the alternative was walking out those doors alone and leaving Silas here for 3 more years. 3 more years of rotating roommates who came and went like seasons. 3 more years of caseworkers who meant well but had too many cases to remember anyone's name. 3 more years of being alone in a room full of people. That was something I could not do. I would rather fail trying than succeed at abandoning him. Our parents died in a truck accident when I was 14. Silas was 11. I remembered every detail of that day with the kind of clarity that only trauma can produce. The way the phone rang at Mrs. Henderson's house, where we were staying while Mom and Dad drove to Cleveland for a wedding. The way Mrs. Henderson's face changed when she answered. The way the world seemed to tilt on its axis, like someone had kicked out one of the legs holding everything up, and nothing had ever quite righted itself again. The funeral was 3 days later. I wore a black dress that someone from the church had donated because I did not own anything appropriate for burying my parents. Silas wore a suit that was too big in the shoulders and too short in the sleeves. We stood by the graves and listened to a minister talk about God's plan, and I remembered thinking that if this was God's plan, then God and I were going to have words someday. After that, we entered the system. Foster care, group homes, temporary placements that were supposed to become permanent and never did. We were lucky, the social workers kept telling us. At least we had each other. At least we had not been separated. Not yet, anyway. We had one living relative, a grandfather on our mother's side named Theodore Holloway, who lived somewhere in the mountains of Montana. I remembered him only in fragments. The smell of sawdust and wood shavings that clung to his flannel shirts. A quiet voice that explained how to identify birds by their songs. A pair of rough hands, calloused from decades of work, that had held mine when I was very small. The foster care system had tried to place us with him. At least, that is what they told us. But Montana was too far. The paperwork was too complicated. Grandfather was too old, they said. Too sick. The house was not suitable. The income was not verified. There was always another reason, another excuse, another stack of forms that had to be filled out before anything could happen. And then, 2 years after our parents died, we received word that Theodore Holloway had passed away. Heart failure, they said. He died alone in that Montana farmhouse while we rotted in a group home 3 states away, never knowing that he had been fighting to reach us the entire time. So here we were, 2 orphans with $45 between us, a canvas backpack full of secondhand clothes, and nowhere in the world to go. You should eat, I said to Silas, though I could not follow my own advice. He shrugged. That teenage gesture that could mean anything. That could mean nothing. What's the point? I did not have an answer for that. Mrs. Patterson appeared at our table. She was the morning supervisor, a tired woman in her 50s, with kind eyes that had seen too many kids walk out these doors into uncertain futures. She always smelled faintly of coffee and hand sanitizer, and she had a habit of touching her cross necklace when she was worried about something. She was touching it now. Wren, she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. This came for you yesterday, from a probate office in Montana. They specifically asked me to wait until today to give it to you. She placed a manila envelope on the table between us. My name was typed neatly on the front. Wren Holloway. The return address was from a law office called Harrison and Associates, located in a town called Cedar Bluff, Montana. I had never heard of it. Silas leaned forward, suddenly interested. What is it? I don't know. I picked up the envelope slowly, feeling its weight in my hands. It was heavier than a single letter. There was something else inside. They didn't say. I slid my finger under the flap and tore it open carefully, as if whatever was inside might shatter if I moved too quickly. Inside, I found a single typed letter and something else. A piece of paper that looked hand-drawn, covered in lines and markings that might have been a map. The letter was short, barely half a page, but the words on it changed everything. Dear Miss Holloway, we are writing to inform you that your grandfather, Theodore Holloway, named you as the sole beneficiary of his estate prior to his passing 2 years ago. The estate includes a parcel of land comprising 47 acres, a farmhouse and associated structures located in Cedar Bluff, Montana. Due to unpaid property taxes, the estate was at risk of forfeiture to the county. However, if you wish to claim the property, you may do so by paying the outstanding tax balance of $10. $10. We have been instructed to hold this letter until your 18th birthday. Sincerely, Harold Harrison, Esquire. Harrison and Associates. I read it twice, then 3 times. The words kept rearranging themselves in my brain, refusing to make sense. $10. That could not be right. Land did not cost $10. A cup of coffee at the gas station down the road cost nearly that much. A value meal at McDonald's cost more than that. The dress I was wearing, which I had bought at a thrift store 2 years ago, had cost more than that. What does it say? Silas grabbed for the letter, and I let him take it. I watched his eyes move across the page, watched his expression shift from curiosity to confusion, to something that looked almost like hope before settling into suspicion. This is a scam, he said flatly, tossing the letter back onto the table. Has to be. Maybe. Wren, nobody leaves you a farm for $10. This is how they get you. You show up, they hit you with fees, hidden costs, processing charges. You end up worse than before, and they get whatever money you had left. He was probably right. Silas had always been the practical one, the one who saw traps before stepping into them. 4 years in the system had taught him to be suspicious of anything that looked too good to be true. Because in our experience, things that looked too good to be true always were. But something about this letter felt different. I picked up the hand-drawn map and studied it. The paper was old, yellowed at the edges. The lines had been drawn in pencil that had faded with time, but I could still make out the general shape of things. A road marked with an X, a cluster of buildings, mountains sketched along one edge, and at the bottom, written in shaky handwriting that looked like it belonged to someone old or sick, were the words, for Wren and Silas. Come home. Come home. I felt something stir in my chest. A memory. The faint echo of a voice I had almost forgotten. The smell of sawdust. The patient way someone had once shown me how to hold a pencil. Theodore Holloway, my grandfather. The man I had met maybe 3 times in my entire life. Always when I was too young to remember clearly. The man who had tried to reach us after our parents died. The man who had died alone while we were stuck in a system that was supposed to protect us. He had been thinking of us. Even at the end, he had been planning something. It's real, I said quietly. Silas looked at me like I had lost my mind. You don't know that. I can feel it. I touched the map, running my fingers over the faded pencil lines. He drew this himself. Look at the handwriting. It's the same as the signature on the birthday card. What birthday card? I had never told him. There were some things I kept even from Silas, small treasures I hoarded against the darkness. But I reached into my backpack now and pulled out the tattered envelope I had carried with me for 4 years. Inside was a birthday card, simple and cheap, with a picture of a kitten on the front. Inside, in the same shaky handwriting as the map, were the words, "Happy 14th birthday, Wren. I'm trying to bring you home. Love, Grandpa." It had arrived 2 weeks after the funeral, the last thing I ever received from him before the letter stopped coming. Silas stared at the card for a long moment. Something in his expression softened, just for a second, before the walls went back up. "Even if it's real," he said, "what are we supposed to do? We have $45. Montana is thousands of miles away. And you saw what the letter said. The place has been sitting empty for 2 years. It's probably falling apart." "Probably. So what's the plan? Walk there?" I looked at my brother, at the dark circles under his eyes, at the way he held himself, shoulders hunched, arms crossed, protecting himself from a world that had given him every reason to be afraid. Then I looked at the letter again. $10, 47 acres, a farmhouse, a place that belonged to us. "We have $45, I said slowly, the plan forming as I spoke. 10 for the land, the rest for bus tickets. Silas stared at me. "You cannot be serious." "What else do we have? Tell me, Silas. What's waiting for us here? The guardianship paperwork is going to be denied. You know it is. They're going to put you in another placement, and I'm going to end up in a shelter somewhere, and we'll see each other maybe once a month if we're lucky. Is that what you want?" "Of course that's not what I want." "Then what do we have to lose? $45 and a bus ride. That's it. That's the entire risk. If it's a scam, we'll figure something else out. We always do. But if it's real..." I trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. If it was real, we might finally have somewhere to go. Somewhere that no one could take away from us. Somewhere that was ours. Silas was quiet for a long time. I watched him struggle with it. Watched the fear and the hope wrestling behind his eyes. Finally, he let out a breath that seemed to carry years of exhaustion with it. "Fine," he said. "But when this blows up in our faces, I reserve the right to say I told you so." Deal. 3 hours later, I walked out of St. Michael's group home for the last time. The metal door clicked shut behind me with a sound that felt final, permanent, like the period at the end of a sentence. I stood on the sidewalk with Silas beside me, both of us carrying everything we owned in canvas backpacks that had been donated by some church group years ago. The straps were fraying, the zippers were starting to stick. Neither of us looked back. The walk to the Greyhound station took almost an hour. We could have taken a bus, but that would have cost money, and every dollar mattered now. So we walked through streets that were slowly waking up, past convenience stores with bars on the windows and laundromats with faded signs, past apartment buildings where people sat on fire escapes smoking cigarettes and watching the world go by with empty eyes. Nobody looked at us twice. We were just 2 kids with backpacks. Nothing unusual. Nothing worth noticing. At the station, I approached the counter where a woman with tired eyes and long acrylic nails was scrolling through her phone. 2 tickets to Cedar Bluff, Montana, I said. She looked up, studying us with the kind of assessment that people develop when they spend their lives watching travelers come and go. "Cedar Bluff? That's a transfer in Billings. Going to take you about 19 hours, give or take." "That's fine." She quoted a price. $31 for both tickets. I handed over the cash, watching our safety net shrink to almost nothing. $14 left, plus the $10 for the property taxes. $4 would remain after everything was paid. $4 between us and the void. The tickets felt fragile in my hand. Two pieces of paper that represented either the biggest mistake of my life or the only chance we had left. I was not sure which yet. The bus was scheduled to leave in 2 hours. We found seats in the waiting area, hard plastic chairs that had been bolted to the floor to prevent theft. Around us, other travelers waited in various states of exhaustion and anticipation. An elderly woman clutching a paper bag. A young man with headphones covering his ears, nodding along to music only he could hear. A mother with two small children who kept running between the rows of seats while she called after them in Spanish. "I'm scared," Silas said quietly, his voice so low I almost missed it. I looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time in weeks. He seemed smaller somehow, younger. Despite all his cynicism and practiced indifference, he was still just a kid, a 15-year-old boy who had lost his parents, lost his grandfather, and was about to lose the only home he had known for 4 years. "Me too," I admitted. "What if it's all gone? What if there's nothing there? Then we'll figure something out. We always do." "Do we? Because from where I'm sitting, we've just been surviving. That's not the same as figuring things out." He was right, of course. For 4 years, we had been in survival mode, getting through each day, waiting for something to change, hoping that eventually, somehow, things would get better. But hope was not a strategy. Hope was what you had when you had nothing else. Maybe that was exactly what this trip was. Hope. The desperate, foolish belief that somewhere in the mountains of Montana, there was something waiting for us. Something our grandfather had left behind. "I know it seems crazy," I said, "and maybe it is. But that letter? Silas, he knew. He knew we would need somewhere to go. He planned for this." "He's dead, Ren. He's been dead for 2 years. Whatever he planned, it doesn't matter anymore." "Then why did he tell them to wait until my birthday? Why draw a map? Why write 'come home' at the bottom?" I pulled out the letter and showed him again. "This isn't random. This isn't a scam. This is a man who loved us trying to reach us one last time." Silas was quiet for a long moment. Then he took the map from my hands and studied it, his brow furrowed in concentration. "It's really far out there," he said finally. "Look, the nearest town is like 4 miles away. No paved roads." "I know. There's no electricity, no running water." The letter said that. "I know. We don't know anything about farming or homesteading or whatever. We're city kids. We grew up in foster homes. The closest I have ever been to nature is that field trip to the zoo in 5th grade. I know all of that, Silas." I took a breath, trying to find the words that would make him understand. "But we have nothing here. Nothing. At least there. We have land. We have walls. We have something that belongs to us. That's more than we've ever had before." He looked at me for a long moment. Then slowly he handed the map back. "Okay," he said. "Let's go find out what Grandpa left us." The bus rumbled through the night, carrying us west through landscapes I had only ever seen in photographs. Ohio fell away first, the familiar gray giving way to the rolling hills of Indiana. Then Illinois, flat and endless, fields stretching to the horizon like a green and brown ocean. Silas slept with his head against the window, his breath fogging the glass in rhythmic clouds. I could not sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, my mind started spinning with possibilities and fears. What if the farmhouse was completely destroyed? What if the land had been seized by the county anyway? What if we showed up and discovered that someone else had already claimed it? What if? What if? What if? The other passengers changed at each stop. People got off. People got on. An old man sat beside me for a while, smelling of tobacco and peppermint. A young woman with a baby who cried for 3 hours straight. A soldier in uniform who stared out the window without speaking. I watched them all come and go, these strangers sharing a journey with us. Each of them had their own story, their own destination, their own hopes and fears. For a few hours, our lives overlapped in this narrow metal tube hurtling through the darkness. Then they were gone, and we kept moving forward. Wyoming arrived with the sunrise. Mountains rose in the distance, purple and blue against a sky that was slowly filling with light. I had never seen anything like it. In the city, the horizon was always blocked by buildings. Here, there was nothing but space. "Wake up," I whispered, shaking Silas's shoulder. "Look." He blinked awake, grumpy and disoriented. Then he saw the view through the window, and his expression changed. "Whoa, I know." We watched in silence as the landscape transformed around us. The flat plains gave way to rolling hills, then to mountains that seemed to grow taller with each passing mile. Trees appeared, first in scattered clusters, then in vast forests that covered the slopes like green fur. Rivers gleamed silver in the morning light, carving their way through valleys that looked like something from a dream. This was where our grandfather had lived. This was the world he had known, had loved, had tried to share with us, and somehow, impossibly, we were finally going to see it. Cedar Bluff appeared in the early afternoon. The bus dropped us at a station that was little more than a bench beside a gas station, one of those places where Greyhound barely slowed down before continuing on its way. We stood on the sidewalk with our backpacks, blinking in the bright mountain sunlight. The town was small, really small, smaller than any place I had ever been. A single main street stretched before us, lined with buildings that looked like they had been there for 100 years. A diner with a neon sign that said Betty's in flickering pink letters. A hardware store with tools displayed in the window. A church with a white steeple pointing toward the sky. A brick building with brass letters that read Harrison and Associates. The air was different here. Colder, cleaner, thinner somehow, like there was less of it to breathe. I could smell pine trees and wood smoke, and something else underneath. Something wild and ancient. "It's really quiet," Silas said. He was right. Compared to the constant noise of the city, Cedar Bluff felt almost silent. No traffic, no sirens, no crowds. Just the whisper of wind through the trees and the distant sound of a bird calling to its mate. "Let's find the lawyer," I said. Harrison and Associates occupied a small office on the second floor of the brick building. The staircase creaked beneath our feet as we climbed, and the hallway smelled of old paper and wood polish. A brass plaque beside one door confirmed we were in the right place. I knocked. "Come in," a voice called. The office was cramped but tidy, dominated by a large wooden desk covered in stacks of documents. Behind it sat an elderly man with silver hair and round glasses perched low on his nose. He looked up as we entered, studying us with sharp eyes that seemed to see more than they should. "You must be Miss Holloway," he said, not a question. "Yes, sir. And this is my brother, Silas." "I know." He gestured to two chairs across from his desk. "Please sit. I'm Harold Harrison. I was your grandfather's attorney for the last 30 years of his life." We sat. The chairs were old leather, cracked and worn but comfortable. On the wall behind Harrison hung a series of photographs, landscapes mostly, mountains and valleys and sunsets that looked like paintings. "I wasn't certain you would come," Harrison admitted, folding his hands on the desk. "Most people hear about a property like this, miles from anywhere. No utilities, back taxes owed, and they decide it's not worth the trouble. We didn't have anywhere else to go," I said honestly. Something in his expression changed, softened. He nodded slowly, as if I had confirmed something he already suspected. "Your grandfather talked about you constantly," he said. "Both of you." He showed me photographs, told me stories about when you were babies, when your mother would bring you to visit. He loved you very much. My throat tightened. "We didn't know him well. We only met him a few times when we were young." "I know, and that was the great tragedy of his final years." Harrison paused, seeming to weigh his next words carefully. "He tried everything to bring you here. After your parents passed, he hired lawyers, filed petitions, made phone calls that probably drove the county social services department to distraction. But the system," he shook his head, "the system was not designed for situations like yours." "They said he was too old," I whispered. "Too far away." "They said many things. None of them reflected his actual ability to care for you. But by the time he had exhausted every legal avenue, his health was failing. Heart disease, he couldn't travel, could barely make the trip into town some days." Harrison's voice grew quieter. "In the end, all he could do was prepare. Make sure that when you were finally old enough to make your own choices, There would be something waiting for you. Silas stirred beside me. The letters, he said. He wrote letters, didn't he? We never got them. 247, Harrison confirmed. I know because he filed copies with me, just in case. Every single one was returned. Address unknown. Contact not permitted. Recipient refused. The system blocked every attempt he made to reach you. I felt something crack inside my chest. A wall I had built years ago, back when I first realized that no one was coming to save us, that we would have to save ourselves. 247 letters, 4 years of trying, and we never knew. Harrison opened a drawer and removed 2 objects, placing them carefully on the desk between us. 2 brass keys, old and heavy, darkened with age. They looked ancient, like something from a museum. Your grandfather left specific instructions, he said. These keys opened 2 different locks on the cellar door at the farmhouse. He wanted each of you to have one. He paused. His exact words were these: only when they open it together will they truly be home. I picked up one of the keys. It was heavier than I expected, cold against my palm. Silas reached for the other one slowly, almost reverently. Why 2 locks? He asked. He never explained. Theodore was a private man, especially toward the end, but he planned this very carefully, over many years. He wanted to make certain that whatever he left behind, you would find it together, that you would rely on each other. I turned the key over in my fingers, feeling the weight of it. Our grandfather, alone in Montana, knowing he was running out of time, knowing he could not reach us no matter how hard he tried. So instead, he had prepared. He had made sure that when we finally came, we would not come alone. It was the first time anyone had planned anything for us in 4 years. Harrison slid a piece of paper across the desk. Sign here, and the property is yours. I'll need $10 for the outstanding tax balance. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the folded bill I had set aside at the bus station. It was wrinkled and soft from being handled too many times, passed from my hands to the cashier and back again at every truck stop and convenience store where we had been afraid to spend too much. I placed it on the desk. Harrison looked at the money, then back at us. His eyes glistened slightly behind his glasses. The property is about 4 miles outside town, he said quietly. There's a dirt road that leads most of the way, but the last mile or so is just a track through the woods. No phone, no electricity, no running water. The house has been empty for 2 years. I won't pretend it will be easy. We know, I said. Do you have transportation? We'll walk. He was quiet for a moment. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out a business card. My number's here. If you need anything at all, call me. And there's a woman named Ruth Dawson who lives about a mile from the property. She was a friend of your grandfather's. She checks on the place from time to time. Good people. I took the card. Thank you for everything. Harrison stood and walked us to the door. Before we stepped outside, he placed a hand on my shoulder. His touch was light, gentle, the way you might touch something precious and fragile. Your grandfather never stopped believing you would come, he said. Never. Not even at the end. He told me once that he could feel it in his bones, that someday, somehow, his grandchildren would find their way home. He paused. I think he would be very proud of you, both of you. I could not speak. I just nodded and walked out into the cold Montana afternoon. Now, if you've been following along this far, I want to pause and ask you something. Have you ever been in a situation where everything felt impossible? Where every logical voice in your head was screaming at you to turn back, to give up, to accept that some things just aren't meant to be? And yet something deeper, something quieter, kept pushing you forward anyway. That was us. 2 kids from the foster care system with $14 between us, standing in a town we had never heard of, about to walk 4 miles into the wilderness to claim a piece of land that might be worthless. By any reasonable measure, we were out of our minds. But sometimes hope is the only compass you have. Sometimes you have to trust that the people who loved you knew something you didn't. And sometimes, just sometimes, the crazy thing turns out to be the only thing that makes sense. Let me tell you what we found at the end of that road. The walk to the property took nearly 3 hours. The paved road through town gave way to gravel after the first mile, then to dirt after the second. By the 3rd mile, there was no road at all, just 2 faint tire tracks cutting through tall grass and scattered pine trees. My feet ached in my worn-out sneakers, blisters forming on my heels with every step. The sun was getting lower, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. I could see my breath now, small clouds that dispersed quickly in the cold mountain air. Every sound seemed amplified in the silence. The crunch of our footsteps, the whisper of wind through the pines, the distant cry of a hawk circling overhead. Silas had stopped complaining about an hour ago, which worried me more than the complaints had. When my brother went quiet, it meant he was retreating into himself, building walls, preparing for disappointment. "Maybe we should have stayed in town," he said finally, his voice flat. "Found somewhere to sleep. Come out here tomorrow when it's light." "With what money? We have $4 left." He did not answer. We pushed through a cluster of trees, stepping over fallen branches and patches of old snow that still clung to the shadows where the sun could not reach. The forest smelled like pine and cold earth, like something ancient and unchanged. I had never been anywhere so quiet in my entire life. And then the trees opened up and we stopped. There it was. The farmhouse stood in the center of a wide clearing, a two-story structure with white paint peeling in long strips from the wooden siding. The porch sagged on one side, the boards warped and gray from years of weather. Some of the windows had been boarded up with plywood that was starting to rot at the edges. A red barn stood about 50 yards away, leaning slightly to one side like an old man resting against a wall. Behind the house, the land stretched out toward distant mountains, acres and acres of overgrown fields and scattered pine trees. In the fading light, everything was tinged with gold, like the whole world was holding its breath. "It's a wreck," Silas said. He was right. The place looked abandoned, forgotten, left to slowly collapse back into the earth. Nobody had lived here for 2 years. Nobody had cared for it. The weeds grew waist-high around the foundation. The roof had missing shingles that left dark gaps like missing teeth, but there was something else I noticed, something that made my heart beat a little faster. The foundation was solid, stone and concrete, built to last for generations. The roof was sagging but intact, no major holes that I could see. And the front door, despite the weathered appearance of everything else, looked sturdy and well-maintained. Someone had oiled the hinges recently. Someone had replaced the handle. "The bones are good," I said quietly. "It's not dead. It's just sleeping." Silas gave me a look that suggested he thought I was losing my mind. Maybe I was, but we had come too far to turn back now. I walked up the porch steps slowly, testing each one before putting my full weight on it. The wood groaned and creaked, but it held. The front door was unlocked. Inside, the air was cold and stale, thick with dust. Late afternoon light filtered through gaps in the boarded windows, casting long shadows across the wooden floor. I could see a living room with a stone fireplace, a kitchen with an old cast-iron stove, a staircase leading up to the second floor. Everything was covered in a fine layer of dust. Cobwebs stretched between the furniture like lace curtains. The silence was so complete I could hear my own heartbeat. But as my eyes adjusted to the dim light, I began to notice something strange. The fireplace had firewood stacked beside it, dry wood, neatly split, carefully arranged. On the kitchen counter, there was a kerosene lamp with oil still in the base. Blankets were folded on the sofa, thick wool blankets that looked almost new. And in the kitchen, on a shelf above the stove, I could see canned goods lined up in neat rows. Someone had prepared this place. Someone had made sure that whoever arrived would have what they needed to survive the first night. "Wren." Silas was pointing at the kitchen table. Sitting in the center of the worn wooden surface was a thick envelope. On the front, written in shaky handwriting that I recognized from the birthday card, were the words, "For Wren and Silas. Only open when you are both here." I looked at my brother. He looked at me. Then I picked up the envelope and opened it. Inside was a letter and a stack of cash. I counted it with trembling hands. $50 bills. $5,000. More money than I had ever seen in my entire life. The letter was written on yellow legal paper, the handwriting cramped and careful. Some of the words were hard to read, as if the hand that wrote them had been shaking. I read it aloud, my voice barely above a whisper. "My dear grandchildren, if you are reading this, it means you found your way home. It means the system finally let you go. and you made the choice to come here instead of anywhere else. I cannot tell you how long I have waited for this day, how many nights I have lain awake imagining this moment. The money is for supplies. Use it carefully. There is more to find, but you will need to work for it. That is part of the plan. I know you must have questions. I know you are probably confused and frightened. The world has not been kind to you, and I am so sorry that I could not protect you from that. I tried. For 4 years, I tried everything I could think of. I hired lawyers. I filed paperwork. I made phone calls until I could not speak. Nothing worked. The letters I sent were returned unopened. The court dates were postponed. The system decided that an old man in Montana was not a suitable guardian, no matter how much he loved you. So I did the only thing I could. I prepared. I made this place ready for the day when you would finally be old enough to make your own choices. When no one could tell you where to go or who you could see. There is a cellar beneath the barn. Your keys will open it, but I ask you to wait. Do not open it until you have built something together, until you have put your hands on this land and made it yours. You will understand why when the time comes. I have loved you since before you were born. I love you still, even though I am no longer there to tell you. And I believe with everything I have that you can make a life here, a real life, the kind of life your parents would have wanted for you. Welcome home. Your grandfather, Theodore Holloway. I could not finish reading aloud. By the second paragraph, my voice had broken. By the third, I was crying too hard to speak. Silas took the letter from my trembling hands and read the rest in silence. When he finished, he set it down gently on the table and stared at it for a long moment. He knew, he said finally. All this time, he knew we would come. He hoped. Same thing for him. Silas wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, pretending he was not crying. He got everything ready, the wood, the blankets, the food. He did all of this because he believed in us, because he loved us. We stood there in the fading light, two kids in an abandoned farmhouse, holding $5,000 and a letter from a dead man who had never stopped fighting for us. The silence stretched out, filled with everything we could not say. Finally, Silas spoke again. We should start a fire. It's going to get cold tonight. I nodded. Yeah, we should. Neither of us moved. We just stood there looking at the letter, feeling the weight of our grandfather's love settling around us like a blanket we had not known we needed. That first night was the coldest of my life. We managed to get a fire going in the stone fireplace using the wood that had been left for us. The flames cast dancing shadows on the walls, painting everything in shades of orange and gold. Heat radiated outward, pushing back the darkness, but doing little against the chill that seeped through every crack in the old walls. Silas fell asleep on the sofa around midnight, wrapped in every blanket we could find. I sat by the fire, feeding it wood, unable to sleep. Through the gaps in the boarded windows, I could see stars. More stars than I had ever seen in my life. In the city, light pollution drowned out everything. The sky was always orange, always hazy, always empty. Here it was crowded with light. The Milky Way stretched across the heavens like a river of diamonds. Constellations I had only ever seen in books blazed overhead with impossible clarity. I sat there for hours watching the fire and the stars, thinking about my grandfather, trying to remember his face from when I was small. The memories were fragments, nothing more. A voice, a smell, a pair of hands that had held mine. But I remembered feeling safe with him. I remembered that much. He had spent years preparing this place for us. The firewood, the lamp oil, the blankets, the money. He had thought of everything, and now he was gone, and we were here, and somehow we had to figure out what came next. Morning arrived slowly, creeping through the gaps in the boards with thin beams of golden light. I had dozed off at some point, slumped against the stone wall near the fireplace. My neck ached, and my whole body felt stiff from the cold. But when I opened my eyes and looked around, I felt something I had not felt in years. Possibility. The farmhouse looked different in the daylight. The dust was still there, the cobwebs, the decades of neglect. But I could see the bones of the place now, the solid structure beneath the decay. The walls were straight, the floors were level. The roof had kept out the rain for all these years. It needed work, a lot of work, but it was not hopeless. I stepped out onto the porch and looked at the property in full daylight for the first time. The land stretched out before me in every direction. 47 acres of rolling fields and scattered trees leading toward mountains that seemed close enough to touch. The air was cold and clean, carrying the scent of pine and earth. Birds sang in the branches overhead. Somewhere in the distance, a hawk cried. "It's beautiful," Silas said from behind me. I turned. He was standing in the doorway, wrapped in one of the wool blankets, his hair sticking up at odd angles. Despite everything, he looked more peaceful than I had seen him in years. "Yeah," I agreed. "It is. What do we do now?" I thought about the letter, about our grandfather's instructions. Do not open the cellar until you have built something together. "We start building," I said. The first week was about survival. We walked into Cedar Bluff twice to buy supplies from the general store. Food that would last, canned goods, dried beans, rice, flour, candles and matches, basic tools from the hardware store. Emmett Hargrove, the owner, was a weathered man in his late 60s with hands that looked like they had spent a lifetime building things. He studied us with sharp eyes the first time we walked in. "You're Theodore's grandchildren," he said. Not a question. "Yes, sir." He nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. "Your grandfather was a good man. Helped me out more than once when times were hard. Saved my farm when the drought nearly took everything." He paused. "If you need anything, you come to me. We'll figure it out." I did not know what to say to that. In the city, kindness always came with strings attached. Here was a stranger offering help simply because he had known our grandfather. "Thank you," I managed. Emmett showed us how to pick out the right tools. A hammer with good balance, a handsaw that would cut straight, nails in various sizes, a level for making sure the things were true. He explained each item patiently, as if teaching two city kids about basic construction was the most natural thing in the world. "Building something isn't about getting it right the first time," he told me as I struggled to choose between two different hammers. "It's about not giving up when the wood fights back. Measure twice, cut once, and never be ashamed to ask for help." Ruth Dawson showed up on the third day. She was 65 years old, a widow who lived about a mile down the road in a farmhouse that actually had electricity and running water. She arrived in an old pickup truck, carrying a casserole dish covered in aluminum foil and wearing an expression that was equal parts warmth and worry. "Lord have mercy," she said when she saw us standing on the porch. "Theodore told me you might come someday, but after all this time I wasn't sure. Let me look at you." She set the casserole on the porch railing and studied our faces like she was memorizing them. Then, without warning, she pulled both of us into a hug that smelled like lavender and baking bread. "You look like your mother," she said to me when she pulled back, her eyes glistening. She was a beautiful girl, used to run through these fields like a wild thing when she was little. "You knew her?" "Knew her?" "Honey, I watched her grow up. This was her home before it was your grandfather's." Ruth wiped her eyes and picked up the casserole again. "Now come on inside. You need to eat something real, and I need to see what we're working with here." She swept through the house like a force of nature, cataloging everything that needed to be fixed. The water pump that had stopped working, the stove that needed new parts, the windows that needed to be reglazed before winter. She made a list on the back of an envelope, writing in neat cursive that reminded me of something from another century. "Your grandfather talked about you constantly," she said while checking the fireplace damper. "Showed me pictures, told me about every letter he wrote, every phone call he tried to make. It about broke his heart that he couldn't reach you." "The system," I said quietly. "They wouldn't let him." Ruth's expression darkened. "The system. Don't get me started on that. Theodore spent a fortune on lawyers, on court fees, on everything he could think of. But there was always another form, another requirement, another reason they said no." She shook her head. "In the end, all he could do was make sure this place was ready for you. He spent his last 2 years getting everything prepared." "We found the money," Silas said, "in the envelope." "That was just the beginning. There's more, I suspect. Theodore was a planner. He didn't leave anything to chance." Ruth paused, looking at us with something like admiration. "The fact that you're here, that you made the journey on your own, that tells me he was right about you. You've got his stubbornness, his heart, She stayed for dinner that night, heating up the casserole on the old stove and teaching us how to coax the ancient machine into working. The food was the best thing I had tasted in years. Real chicken, real vegetables, made with care and intention. Silas ate 3 helpings without speaking. I'll come by every few days, Ruth said as she was leaving. Check on things, bring supplies when I can. And you come to me if you need anything, day or night. Theodore was family to me. That means you're family now too. I watched her taillights disappear down the dark road, feeling something shift inside my chest. For 4 years we had been alone, abandoned by a system that was supposed to protect us. And now, in the middle of nowhere, strangers were treating us like we mattered. Maybe that was what community meant. Maybe that was what we had been missing all along. 2 weeks after we arrived, we finally approached the cellar. The barn smelled like old hay and rust, the wooden doors creaking as we pushed them open. Inside, dust motes danced in the beams of light falling through gaps in the roof. Old farm equipment sat abandoned along the walls, covered in cobwebs and time. A tractor that had not run in decades. Plows and harrows and tools whose purposes I could not guess. The cellar door was set into the floor near the back, a heavy wooden hatch reinforced with iron bands. And just as the lawyer had said, there were 2 locks, one on each side of the handle, brass and ancient, green with age. We knelt beside it, each of us holding our key. Together? Silas asked. Together. We inserted the keys simultaneously, turned them at the same moment. The locks clicked open with a sound that echoed through the empty barn, like the snapping of chains that had held something captive for far too long. I grabbed the iron ring and pulled. The hatch came up with a groan, releasing a rush of cold air that smelled like earth and something else, something old and secret. Stone steps descended into darkness. I grabbed the kerosene lamp we had brought and lit it, holding it out in front of me as we climbed down. The walls were dirt, reinforced with old timbers. The air grew colder with each step. The cellar was larger than I expected. The floor was packed earth, the walls lined with wooden shelves that stretched from floor to ceiling. And on those shelves, arranged in careful rows, were dozens of glass canning jars. At first I thought they were empty. Then I lifted one, and it was heavier than it looked, much heavier. I held it up to the lamplight. Money, tightly rolled bundles of cash, packed inside the glass and sealed to keep out moisture. Silas grabbed another jar, then another. Every single one was the same. How much? He whispered. I counted the jars quickly. 12 on the first shelf, 15 on the second, more on the third. Each jar held what looked like several $1,000s in tightly rolled bills. 40 or 50,000, I said, my voice shaking. Maybe more. 45,000, we would learn later when we finally counted it all. Our grandfather had spent years converting his savings into cash, sealing it in mason jars, storing it in a cellar that no one knew about. All for us. But the money was not the only thing down there. Near the back of the cellar, sitting on an old wooden table, was a leather-bound journal thick with pages, and next to it, a small iron box secured with a third lock. The journal had our grandfather's name embossed on the cover in faded gold letters, Theodore Holloway. And on the iron box, written in the same shaky handwriting as the letter upstairs, were the words, "Only open when you have built your first wall together." Have you ever held something that felt like it contained someone's entire soul? That's what the journal felt like in my hands. Heavy, sacred, full of all the words our grandfather had never been able to speak to us in person. I wanted to read it immediately. I wanted to tear open the iron box and discover whatever secrets it held. But our grandfather had asked us to wait, to build something first, to earn what he had left behind. Silas stared at the box for a long time. I could see the struggle on his face, the desperate curiosity warring with respect for a man he had never really known. "This is stupid," he said finally. "Why make us wait? Why not just tell us everything?" "Because he wanted us to understand," I said slowly, the realization forming as I spoke. "He didn't just leave us money and property. He left us a test, a way to prove that we could work together, that we could build something real, or a way to make sure we wouldn't just take the cash and run. Maybe both." We looked at each other in the dim light of the cellar, surrounded by a fortune in glass jars and secrets we weren't yet allowed to know. "Fine," Silas said. We build a wall. How hard can it be? The answer, as it turned out, was very hard. Neither of us had ever built anything in our lives. We had grown up in apartments and group homes, places where the walls already existed and maintenance was someone else's job. The idea of constructing something from raw materials was completely foreign to us. The interior walls of the farmhouse were crumbling in places, old plaster falling away to reveal the wooden lath beneath. I decided we would start with the kitchen, framing in a new wall to replace the one that was barely standing. Emmett Hargrove became our teacher. He came out to the farm every few days, spending hours showing us how to measure and cut lumber, how to drive nails straight, how to check our work with a level and make sure everything was true. The most important thing is your foundation, he said one afternoon, watching me struggle with a stubborn piece of wood that refused to sit square. If your foundation is off, nothing you build on top of it will ever be right. But get that foundation solid, and everything else falls into place. I wasn't sure if he was talking about walls or something else. Maybe both. My hands blistered quickly. The first few days, every swing of the hammer left new wounds on my palms. But gradually, calluses began to form. The blisters turned to hard skin. The hammer started to feel less like a foreign object and more like an extension of my arm. The first wall we tried to build collapsed. The measurements were wrong. The wood was cut at bad angles. The whole thing leaned to one side and then toppled over when Silas accidentally bumped it. The second wall almost held, but one of the corners wasn't square, and when we tried to add the frame for a doorway, the stress was too much. The nails pulled loose, the boards twisted, another failure. The third wall, though, the third wall stood. It wasn't perfect. Some of the nails were crooked, and there was a slight bow in one section that I couldn't quite figure out how to fix. But it was solid. It would hold. And when we stepped back to look at it, I felt something I hadn't felt since before my parents died. Pride. We did that, Silas said quietly. Yeah, we did. Marcus Vance arrived on a Tuesday. We had been at the farm for almost 3 weeks. The weather had warmed slightly, and we had fallen into a rhythm of sorts. Mornings were for chores, clearing brush, chopping wood, making small repairs. Afternoons were for construction. Evenings were for reading our grandfather's journal by lamplight, slowly learning about the man who had loved us from afar. I was on the porch taking a break when a black pickup truck came rolling up the dirt track that served as our driveway. It was newer than any vehicle I had seen in Cedar Bluff, shiny and expensive looking. It did not belong here. Silas stepped out of the barn, shading his eyes against the morning sun. The truck stopped and a man climbed out. He was in his late 50s, well-dressed in a way that looked completely wrong against the backdrop of our crumbling farm. Polished shoes that would be ruined after 3 steps in the mud. A suit jacket that probably cost more than everything I had ever owned. His smile was wide and practiced, the kind of smile that salesmen use when they're trying to convince you that you need something you never knew you wanted. "You must be the Holloway kids," he said, walking toward us like he owned the place. "Name's Marcus Vance, real estate developer out of Billings." I didn't move from the porch. "Can I help you?" "Actually, I think I'm here to help you." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a folder, thick with papers. "I've got some documents here that I think you need to see. Legal matters regarding your grandfather's estate." Something cold settled in my stomach. I glanced at Silas, saw the same wariness in his eyes. Vance spread the papers on the porch railing, arranging them carefully like a poker player revealing his cards. Legal letterhead, account numbers, dates that went back 15 years, language that I couldn't fully understand but that looked official and binding. "What is this?" Silas asked, coming to stand beside me. "It's a debt notice," Vance said smoothly. "Your grandfather borrowed $35,000 from me about 15 years ago. Business venture that didn't work out. He never paid it back." He tapped the papers with one manicured finger. "Under Montana law, that debt is now attached to his estate, which means it's attached to you." My stomach dropped. That can't be right. "I understand this is unexpected. Believe me, I take no pleasure in delivering bad news to young people in your situation." His smile never wavered. "But the law is the law. You have 60 days to pay the balance in full, or the property reverts to me as collateral." Silas stepped forward, his hands clenched into fists. "You're lying." Vance held up his hands in mock surrender. I understand your skepticism. Really, I do. But these documents have been verified by the county clerk's office. Everything is in order. He paused. Of course, if you want to save yourselves the trouble, I'd be happy to take the property off your hands right now. I'll forgive the debt and give you $5,000 for your trouble. You can go back to wherever you came from, start fresh somewhere else. Get off our land, Silas said, his voice shaking with fury. Think about it, Vance continued, as if Silas hadn't spoken. Two kids with no experience, no connections, trying to make a go of it on a broken-down farm in the middle of nowhere? It's a losing proposition. You'll spend everything you have trying to fix this place up, and in 60 days, you'll lose it anyway. He shrugged. Take my offer. Be smart about this. Get off our land. Vance looked at Silas for a long moment, his smile finally flickering. Then he gathered his papers and tucked them back into the folder. 60 days, he said as he walked back to his truck. After that, it's out of your hands. We watched him drive away, the dust from his tires hanging in the air long after he disappeared around the bend. It's a lie, I said. It has to be. But the documents had looked real. The signatures, the dates, all of it had an authenticity that I couldn't dismiss. And we knew nothing about our grandfather's finances, nothing about what debts he might have accumulated over the years. What do we do? Silas asked. I didn't have an answer. That night we had our first real fight. It started over something small. Who was supposed to bring in more firewood? Who had left the kerosene lamp burning when we went to bed? The tiny conflicts that pile up when two people are stressed and scared and don't know how to talk about the things that really matter. But underneath those small arguments was everything else. The fear, the doubt, the crushing weight of Marcus Vance's words. I told you this was a mistake, Silas said, pacing back and forth in front of the fire. I told you from the beginning, and now we're stuck here in the middle of nowhere, and some guy in a suit is going to take everything anyway. We don't know that. We don't know anything. That's the problem, Wren. You dragged me out here based on a letter and a dream, and now what? We've been working ourselves to death building a wall that doesn't matter, and in 60 days, none of this will be ours anyway. At least we tried. Tried what? To fail? To get our hopes up just so someone could crush them again? His voice cracked. I'm tired, Wren. I'm so tired of hoping for things that never happen. He stormed out of the house, slamming the door behind him. I sat by the dying fire, feeling the cold creep back in, feeling everything I had been building start to crumble. Maybe he was right. Maybe I had been foolish to believe that our grandfather could save us from beyond the grave. Maybe some things were just too broken to fix. I picked up his journal and opened it to a random page. The familiar handwriting filled the margins, cramped and careful. Some passages were practical, notes about the farm and the weather. Others were more personal, thoughts and memories and reflections on a long life. But the passage I found that night felt like it had been written just for me. There will be people who come to claim what doesn't belong to them. They will wave papers and speak of law and try to make you feel small and powerless. Don't believe them. The truth is always stronger than any lie, and everything you need to fight back is already in this house. I read it 3 times. Then I stood up and went to find my brother. Silas was sitting on the porch steps, his breath making clouds in the cold night air. He didn't look up when I sat down beside him. I'm sorry, I said. For what? For not listening, for dragging you here without really thinking it through, for being so focused on what I wanted that I didn't stop to consider what you were feeling. He was quiet for a moment. Then he shook his head. You didn't drag me anywhere. I made the choice to come. We both did. But you were right to be scared. We jumped into this without knowing what we were getting into. That's true. He finally looked at me. In the starlight, his face looked older than 15, wearier. But also, underneath all of that, there was something else. Something that looked like determination. But we're here now, and running away isn't going to change anything. So what do? We figure out if those papers are real, and if they're not, we prove it. He stood up and offered me his hand. Grandpa said everything we need is in the house, so let's find it. We searched until dawn. Every drawer, every closet, every box we could find. The farmhouse was full of our grandfather's possessions, accumulated over a lifetime. Old photographs, letters from people we'd never heard of, bills and receipts going back decades. It was overwhelming, the sheer volume of documentation that one life could produce. But somewhere in all of that, there had to be something that would help us. The answer came from an unexpected place. Emmett Hargrove showed up mid-morning with a new batch of lumber and found us bleary-eyed and surrounded by papers. "What happened?" he asked, taking in the chaos. I told him about Marcus Vance, about the debt notice, about the 60-day deadline. As I spoke, Emmett's expression grew darker and darker. "Marcus Vance," he repeated when I finished. He spat the name like it tasted bad. "That man has been circling this county for 15 years, preying on folks who can't fight back. Seniors mostly, people who don't know their rights." "So you know him?" "I know what he did to your grandfather." I leaned forward. "What do you mean?" Emmett was quiet for a moment, as if weighing how much to tell us. Then he sighed and settled into one of the kitchen chairs. 15 years ago, your grandfather had a business partner. They were developing a new irrigation system together, something that could save water during droughts. It was brilliant work. Your grandfather's design. They invested everything they had. "And the partner was Vance?" Emmett nodded. "They worked together for almost 2 years, had contracts with agricultural companies, plans for expansion. And then one night, Marcus Vance disappeared, took $20,000 from their joint account and all the prototype designs, tried to sell them to some company down in California." "What happened?" "Theodore had already filed for a patent. The designs were protected before Vance could claim them as his own. The California deal fell through. Vance lost everything he'd invested in the scheme." Emmett's jaw tightened. "Your grandfather could have pressed charges, could have had him arrested for fraud and theft. But Theodore was tired. He said he didn't want to spend years in court, didn't want to give Vance any more of his time than he'd already taken." "But he kept records," I said, remembering the passage from the journal. "Everything. He told me once, if Vance ever comes back after I'm gone, tell my grandchildren to look behind the family Bible in the bookshelf." He knew that man would try again someday. We found the folder exactly where Emmett said it would be. A thick manila envelope hidden in a gap between the bookshelf and the wall, right behind an old leather-bound Bible that had belonged to our grandmother. Inside was everything. Bank statements showing that Vance had withdrawn the money. Carbon copies of letters Theodore had sent demanding repayment. The original patent filing for the irrigation system, dated 3 months before Vance disappeared, proving that Theodore owned the designs. Photographs of the prototype, receipts, records, evidence, and at the very bottom of the folder, a single sheet of paper. A signed statement from a former employee of Marcus Vance, witnessed and notarized, testifying that he had observed Vance forging financial documents on multiple occasions. "He's a con artist," Silas said, staring at the papers spread across the kitchen table. "He's been doing this to other people. And Grandpa knew he'd come back." I held up the folder. "He spent years putting this together, building a case, making sure we'd have everything we needed to fight back. So what do we do now?" We talked to the sheriff. Sheriff Thompson was a quiet man in his 60s with steady eyes and a handshake that could crush walnuts. He had known our grandfather for 30 years, had played cards with him on Friday nights, had been a pallbearer at his funeral. He listened to our entire story without interrupting. When we handed over the folder, he went through it slowly, his expression growing grimmer with each page. "I've heard rumors about Vance," he said when he finished. "Complaints from folks who said he pressured them into selling property, but no one ever had proof." "We have proof." Thompson looked at me steadily. "You understand what you're doing? This won't be quick or easy. There will be lawyers involved, court dates. Vance will fight back with everything he's got." "I understand." "And you're willing to see it through? Both of you?" Silas and I looked at each other. Then we both nodded. "All right." Thompson stood up and tucked the folder under his arm. "I'm going to make some calls. In the meantime, you two go back to your farm and keep doing what you're doing. Don't let Vance or anyone else scare you off your land." "Thank you, Sheriff." He paused at the door, his hand on the frame. "Your grandfather was one of the finest men I ever knew. He spent his last years worried about you two, preparing for a day he hoped would come. I think he'd be real proud of how you're handling this. If you've made it this far, I want to stop and ask you something. Have you ever had to fight for something that should have been yours all along?" Something that someone else tried to take through lies and manipulation? I know that feeling. The fear, the anger, the terrible uncertainty of not knowing whether right would prevail. But I also learned something in those weeks of waiting, something important. When you stand up for yourself, when you refuse to be pushed around, people notice. The community that had welcomed us began to rally. Ruth brought more than casseroles. She brought information, names of lawyers who worked pro bono, records from the county clerk that contradicted Vance's claims. She brought neighbors who had their own stories about Vance, their own grievances, their own reasons for wanting to see him stopped. And Emmett brought something even more valuable. He brought his time, his expertise, his belief that two city kids could learn to build something real. If this story is resonating with you, if you've ever faced your own Marcus Vance, I'd love to hear about it. Leave a comment below. Subscribe to this channel if you want to know how it all turned out. Because trust me, we're just getting started. Marcus Vance returned 3 weeks later, this time with a lawyer and what he claimed was a court order for eviction. He looked confident as he walked toward the house, certain that two kids couldn't possibly stand against the weight of the legal system. He had done this before, probably dozens of times. Targeted vulnerable people, manufactured debts, pressured them into giving up everything they had. But he had never faced anyone who had Theodore Holloway's documentation. I met him on the porch with Sheriff Thompson standing beside me in the folder of evidence in my hands. "Mr. Vance," I said calmly, "I think there's been a misunderstanding about who owes what to whom." His smile faltered slightly when he saw the sheriff. "This is a civil matter, Thompson. No need for law enforcement." "Actually," Thompson said, "I have some questions for you about forged documents and fraudulent debt claims against several property owners in this county. Might want to call your own lawyer." Vance's face went pale. He looked at the folder in my hands and I saw the exact moment he understood. "Your grandfather," he said bitterly. "He kept records. He kept everything." I stepped forward, holding his gaze. "Every bank statement showing you stole from him. Every letter demanding repayment that you ignored. Every piece of evidence proving that the so-called debt you're claiming doesn't exist. That documentation proves nothing. It's all circumstantial. Then I'm sure you won't mind explaining to a judge why your signature appears on withdrawal slips from accounts you claim you had no access to, or why a former employee of yours is willing to testify under oath that he watched you forge financial documents." The lawyer Vance had brought was already backing toward the truck. Apparently, he hadn't known the full extent of what his client was involved in. Or maybe he had, and he just wasn't willing to go down with the ship. "This isn't over," Vance said. "Yes, it is." I kept my voice steady, even though my heart was pounding. "It's been over for 15 years. You just didn't know it yet." He stared at me for a long moment. I could see the calculation behind his eyes, the weighing of options. Fight or flight, press forward or cut his losses. In the end, he chose to walk away. He turned without another word and climbed into his truck, leaving his lawyer to scramble after him. We watched them drive off, the engine noise fading into the distance. When they were gone, Sheriff Thompson let out a breath. "That man is going to have a very bad few months." "Good," Silas said. I didn't say anything. I just stood there on the porch of our grandfather's house, holding the evidence he had spent years compiling, feeling the weight of his protection settling around us like armor. He had known this day would come, known that someone would try to take what he'd left us, and he had made absolutely certain that we would have the weapons to fight back. With the threat of Vance eliminated, we could finally focus on what really mattered: the wall. We had been working on it for weeks, but progress had been slow, learning as we went, making mistakes, starting over. But now, with the legal cloud lifted, we threw ourselves into the work with renewed energy. Ruth helped. Emmett helped. Even Sheriff Thompson stopped by one afternoon with his teenage nephew, who turned out to be surprisingly skilled with a level. The community that had welcomed us as strangers now embraced us as neighbors. People we had never met brought tools, brought supplies, brought expertise we didn't have. And somewhere in the middle of all that help, Silas and I learned to work together. Not the desperate survival mode we'd been in at the group home, where we clung to each other because there was no one else. This was different. This was partnership. Learning to anticipate each other's movements, knowing when to push and when to step back, trusting that if one of us faltered, the other would be there. The day we finished the wall, the first real structure we had ever built with our own hands, was warm and clear. Late spring in Montana, with wildflowers starting to bloom in the fields around the house. We stepped back and looked at what we had created. It wasn't perfect. Some of the boards were slightly uneven. One corner was a fraction of an inch off square. But it was solid, it would hold, and it was ours. "We did it," Silas said. "Yeah, we did." We stood there for a moment, just looking. Then, without discussing it, we both walked to the barn, to the cellar, to the iron box that had been waiting for us since we arrived. The third key was hidden in the spine of our grandfather's journal, tucked into a small pocket that I had discovered while reading one night. It was smaller than the other two, more delicate. The lock it opened was nearly invisible, built into the seam of the iron box in a way that you wouldn't notice unless you knew to look. I slid the key into place and turned it. The lock clicked open. Inside the box, we found three things. The first was a savings account booklet from a bank in Billings. The account was in both our names, Wren and Silas Holloway, set up as a trust that had been accumulating interest for 20 years. The current balance was $180,000. Silas made a sound like someone had punched him in the gut. I couldn't make any sound at all. The second item was a set of legal documents. Patents for the irrigation system our grandfather had designed. The same one that Marcus Vance had tried to steal. A licensing agreement with an agricultural company in California, granting them rights to use the technology in exchange for annual royalty payments. The payments had been going into our trust account for over a decade, but it was the third item that broke us. A letter, 10 pages, written in our grandfather's increasingly shaky handwriting, the kind of letter that someone writes when they know they're running out of time. "My dearest grandchildren, if you're reading this, it means you've built something. It means you've proven that you can work together, rely on each other, create something from nothing. That was the test, not the money. Never the money. I needed to know that you would be okay without me, that you could survive. I know this seems strange. I know you probably have 1,000 questions. Why did I make you wait? Why didn't I just tell you everything from the beginning? Let me try to explain. When I was young, my own father left me this farm. Just the land and the house, nothing more. No money, no instructions, no guidance. I nearly lost it all within the first year because I didn't know what I was doing, and I was too proud to ask for help. It took me decades to rebuild what I almost destroyed, decades of hard work and harder lessons. But in the process, I learned something valuable. The things we're given freely, we often don't appreciate. But the things we work for, the things we build with our own hands, those become part of us. I wanted you to have that. I wanted you to earn this place, not just inherit it. I wanted you to look around and see your own sweat in the walls, your own effort in every repair, so that when someone like Marcus Vance came along and tried to take it from you, you would fight, because it would be yours, really, truly yours. Now let me tell you about the letters. Over the 4 years you were in foster care, I wrote 247 letters to you. I sent them to every address I could find, every social worker whose name I could discover, every agency that might have known where you were. I begged, I pleaded, I promised everything I had. Every single letter was returned. Address unknown, delivery refused, contact not permitted. I kept them all. They're in the bottom drawer of my desk, still sealed in their returned envelopes. I couldn't bear to open them again after they came back. But they're yours now, every word I wanted to say, every birthday wish, every holiday greeting, every time I lay awake at night just wanting you to know that someone was thinking of you. You were never abandoned. You were never forgotten. Not for one single day. I am so sorry that I couldn't do more. Sorry that I couldn't fight harder, live longer, find some way to bring you home while I was still here to hold you. But I need you to understand something. My failure to reach you was not a measure of how much I loved you. The system failed us. Not me. Not you. The system. And now that system has no power over you anymore. You're adults. You're free. You're home. This land belongs to you. Not because I'm giving it to you, but because you've earned it. You've worked for it. You've built something on it with your own hands. Take care of each other. That's all I ask. Take care of each other and know that somewhere, somehow, I am watching over you, with more pride and love than I could ever put into words. Your grandfather, Theodore Holloway, P.S. There's one more thing. A room I built in the barn, hidden beneath the floor. Your mother helped me design it, back when she was young and full of dreams. I think you'll want to see it. I couldn't finish reading aloud. By the second page, I was crying too hard to speak. Silas took the letter from my trembling hands and read the rest in silence. When he finished, he set it down gently on the table and did something I hadn't seen since our parents' funeral. He cried, not the silent tears that sometimes leaked from his eyes when he thought I wasn't looking. Real crying, the kind that comes from somewhere deep, somewhere that had been locked away for years. His whole body shook with it. I held him the way I wished someone had held us both when we were children. When we stood at the grave and watched our parents lowered into the ground. When we were separated from everything familiar and placed in homes with strangers who would never understand what we had lost. He never stopped, Silas said between sobs. 4 years. He never stopped trying. Never. Not for one single day. We sat there for a long time, holding each other in the kitchen of our grandfather's house, surrounded by evidence of a love that had reached across years and miles and bureaucracy to find us. The letters were exactly where he said they would be. The bottom drawer of the old roll-top desk in the corner of the living room. Stacks of envelopes yellowed with age, each one stamped with the cruel red words, "Return to sender." Some had additional notations. Address unknown. Recipient not at this location. Contact not permitted by court order. We sat on the floor that night and opened them, one by one, taking turns reading them aloud. Birthday cards with money still tucked inside, never delivered. $20 for your 13th birthday. I hope you're doing well in school. I think about you every day. Christmas letters describing how he had decorated the house even though we weren't there. I put up the tree in the living room, the same one your mother used to help me trim when she was small. I hung a stocking for each of you, even though there's no one here to fill them. Updates on the farm, the weather, the neighbors, pages and pages of ordinary life, shared with grandchildren who would never receive them. The apple tree in the backyard finally produced fruit this year. I made a pie and thought of you. Your mother used to love apple pie. Pleas for information, requests for visitation, legal arguments and emotional appeals, all of them rejected, all of them returned. I spoke with a lawyer in Helena today. He says there might be a way to petition for custody if I can prove financial stability. I'm gathering the documents now. The court denied my petition again. They say I'm too old. The house is too remote. They don't understand that none of that matters. What matters is that I love you. I'm not giving up. I want you to know that. However long it takes, whatever I have to do, I'm not giving up. 247 letters, 4 years of trying, and we had never known any of it. He fought so hard, I whispered, and we thought he abandoned us. Silas's voice was hollow. All those years I was so angry. I thought he didn't care. I thought nobody cared. He cared. He cared more than anyone. We stayed up until dawn, reading every letter, learning about the man who had loved us from afar. And with each one, the anger we had carried for so long began to transform into something else. Gratitude for his persistence, sorrow, for everything we had missed, and love, a fierce, protective love for a grandfather we were only now beginning to know. We found the hidden room the next morning. Following the directions in his letter, we located a loose board in the barn floor, right where he said it would be. Underneath was a set of wooden stairs leading down into darkness. The room was small, maybe 10 feet by 12, but it was fully equipped. Workbenches lined the walls covered with tools and half-finished projects. Shelves held books on agriculture, engineering, construction. A drafting table in the center held a complete set of blueprints, plans for renovating the entire farmhouse. Every room mapped out, every improvement detailed, notes in the margins explaining how to do each step. He designed all of this, Silas said, running his hands over the blueprints. Every upgrade, every repair. He figured it all out for us. But there was more. On the wall above the drafting table, he had hung photographs. Our grandmother, who had died before we were born, standing on the front porch with a baby in her arms. Our mother as a young girl, grinning at the camera with missing teeth. Our parents on their wedding day, looking so young and happy that it hurt to see. And there in the corner, a photo I had never seen before. Our grandfather, younger than in any picture we had found elsewhere, holding a newborn baby in his weathered hands, tears streaming down his face, the most joyful expression I had ever seen. Me, the day I was born. Beneath the photograph was a small envelope. Inside, a final note. This was the happiest day of my life, the day I became a grandfather, the day I held you for the first time and promised that I would always be there for you. I'm sorry I couldn't keep that promise in the way I intended, but I hope you understand now that I never broke it. Not really. I was always there, even when you couldn't see me. Always loving you, even when the words couldn't reach you. Take care of each other. Build something beautiful, and know that you are always, always home. If you've been listening this long, I think you understand what I learned in that hidden room. Love doesn't stop because of distance. It doesn't fade because of time. It waits, it prepares. And when we're finally ready to receive it, it's still there, patient and unchanging. Our grandfather couldn't reach us while he was alive. The system that was supposed to protect us kept him away. But he refused to let that be the end of the story. He spent his final years making sure that when we finally came home, we would find everything we needed. Not just money, not just property, but evidence. Proof that we had always been loved, that we had never, not for one moment, been forgotten. Have you ever discovered something that changed everything you thought you knew about your life? That showed you that you were loved in ways you never imagined? I'd love to hear your story. Leave a comment below. Tell me about the people who loved you from afar, who prepared for you without you ever knowing. And if this story has meant something to you, please subscribe to this channel. We share stories like this because they matter. Because sometimes we all need to be reminded that love finds a way, even when everything seems impossible. 6 months later, the farmhouse was transformed. Following our grandfather's blueprints, we had torn out the rotted walls and built new ones. The kitchen had been completely renovated. Running water flowed from the taps, pumped from a well that Emmett helped us restore. Electricity hummed through new wiring that a licensed electrician had installed in exchange for some of the irrigation patent royalties. The white paint on the exterior gleamed fresh in the summer sunlight. The porch no longer sagged. New glass sparkled in the windows, clear and clean. Inside, the rooms were warm and dry, filled with furniture we had salvaged from the barn and restored with our own hands. I enrolled in online courses for agricultural management. Someday, I wanted to learn enough to really make this farm productive, to grow things, to build on what our grandfather had started. Silas went to Cedar Bluff High School, where he made friends for the first time in his life. Real friends. Kids who invited him to their houses, included him in their plans, accepted him without needing to know his whole story first. He joined the track team and discovered he was fast. Really fast. Ruth Dawson became the grandmother we had never known. She came by almost every day, bringing food, bringing advice, bringing the kind of unconditional presence that we had been missing our whole lives. When I got sick that winter, a flu that knocked me out for a week, she moved into the guest room and nursed me back to health, all while keeping Silas fed and the house running. Emmett Hargrove became something like an uncle. He taught Silas how to drive the old truck that had been sitting in the barn, showed me how to read the land, how to understand what the soil needed. He never pushed, never demanded, just offered his knowledge and let us take what we were ready for. And Marcus Vance, he was arrested on federal charges of fraud, forgery, and attempted grand theft. Our evidence was just the beginning. Once the investigation started, 5 other families came forward with similar stories. People he had victimized over the years, too afraid or too overwhelmed to fight back on their own. He was sentenced to 14 years. On a warm evening in September, Silas and I sat on the front porch, watching the sun set behind the mountains. The sky was painted in shades of orange and pink and purple, colors so vivid they looked artificial. The fields stretched out before us, green and gold in the fading light. Somewhere in the trees, an owl was starting its evening calls. "Do you think he knows?" Silas asked. "Grandpa, do you think he knows we're okay?" I thought about that question, about the letters he had written, about the plans he had made, about the love that had reached across time and death to catch us when we fell. I think he always knew, I said finally. That's why he did all of this. He believed in us even when we didn't believe in ourselves. But he never got to see it. He died thinking we might never come home. Maybe. Or maybe he knew somehow. Maybe when you love someone that much, you can feel it when things finally work out. I leaned back in my chair, feeling the worn wood beneath my hands. I like to think he's watching, that somewhere, somehow, he's finally at peace because we're here. Silas was quiet for a long time. The sun sank lower, painting the clouds in deeper shades of red. I used to be so angry, he said eventually, at the system, at the social workers, at everyone who kept us from him. But now, I don't know. It still hurts, but the anger is fading. That's grief, I said. That's how it works. The sharp edges wear down over time. I just wish I could have known him, really known him, not just through letters and journals and stories from neighbors. We know him now. Maybe that's enough. Is it? I looked out at the land, at the mountains in the distance, at the house behind us, solid and warm, filled with evidence of our grandfather's love. It has to be him, I said. It's what we have. There's one more thing I want to tell you before I go. A few months ago, I was going through some boxes in the attic, looking for something Ruth had mentioned that might help with the vegetable garden I was trying to plant. Instead, I found something else, a wooden chest about the size of a shoebox, hidden under a pile of old blankets. Inside was a collection of small items, a pressed flower, a silver locket with a picture inside, a baby's first tooth in a tiny velvet pouch, and a letter written not by our grandfather, but by our mother. Daddy, I don't know if you'll ever read this. You always said you weren't good with words, and I know writing letters isn't something you enjoy. But I wanted to put this down on paper anyway, so it would exist somewhere permanent. I'm pregnant. It's a girl. We're going to name her Wren, after the little bird you taught me to love when I was young. Do you remember? We used to sit on the porch and watch them build their nests in the eaves. You said they were proof that even small things could create something beautiful. I'm scared, Daddy. Scared of being a mother. Scared I won't know what to do. But then I think about you, about how you raised me on your own after Mama died, how you figured it out even when you were terrified. And I think maybe I can do it too. Wren doesn't know it yet, but she's already lucky. She has you. She has this land. She has a family that will love her no matter what. I hope she gets to know you the way I know you. I hope she sits on that porch with you and listens to you explain about the birds. I hope she runs through these fields the way I used to. I hope she grows up knowing she's loved. I hope she comes home someday. Your daughter, Sarah. I read that letter 17 times before I could stop crying. My mother, writing about me before I was born, hoping that I would know my grandfather, hoping that I would come home. She never could have imagined what would happen. The accident, the foster homes, the years of separation. She wrote that letter full of hope and love, never knowing that her dreams for me would be deferred for 18 years. But in the end, she was right. I did come home. I did get to know him in my own way. I did run through these fields, even if I was older than she probably imagined. And I do know that I'm loved. Here's what I learned, standing on that porch with my brother, surrounded by 47 acres of Montana land that we bought for $10. Home isn't a place you find. It's something you build, piece by piece, wall by wall, day by day. Sometimes it takes years. Sometimes it takes generations. But if you're patient, if you're persistent, if you refuse to give up, even when everything seems impossible, eventually you get there. Our grandfather couldn't reach us while he was alive. The system was too strong, the barriers too high. But he never stopped trying. And when he realized he wasn't going to win that battle, he found another way. He built us a home and filled it with everything we would need. Money to survive, tools to build, evidence to protect ourselves, and most importantly, proof of his love. Proof that we were never alone, never forgotten, never abandoned. $10. That's what it cost to claim this land. But the real price was measured in something else entirely. In years of patient preparation, in hundreds of letters that never arrived, in the fierce, unshakable belief of an old man who refused to give up on the grandchildren he would never see again. Sometimes love looks like presence, like hugs and shared meals and voices that say I'm here. But sometimes love looks like absence, like silence, like letters that never arrive and phone calls that are never answered. Because sometimes the people who love us most are fighting battles we know nothing about, working in shadows, building foundations we won't discover for years, preparing places for us to land when the world finally lets us fly. Our grandfather did that for us. He spent his final years constructing a safety net that we didn't know existed. And when we finally fell, when the system pushed us out with nowhere to go, we landed exactly where he wanted us, home. Thank you for staying with me through this whole story. I know it was long, I know some parts were hard to hear, but if you made it this far, I think there's something in here that resonated with you. Something about love, or loss, or hope, or second chances. If you have a story like this, a story about finding where you belong, about discovering love you didn't know was there, I want to hear it. Leave it in the comments. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. Because these stories matter. They remind us that we're not alone in our struggles, that other people have walked these roads before us and found their way through. Subscribe to this channel if you want more stories like this one. We share them because we believe in the power of hope, in the strength of family, however we define it, in the possibility that no matter how lost we feel, there's always a way home. Until next time, remember this. Someone, somewhere, is preparing something for you, working in ways you can't see, loving you in ways you might not recognize. And one day when you least expect it, you're going to stumble onto the path they laid. And when you do, you'll know. You were never alone. You were always home. You just had to find your way there. The end of reading and more. So.